Welcome to the 22nd episode of the Student Recap Podcast, Motorsport Mania, and today I am joined with Luciano Cartilli, one of my best friends, I would say. He's in running with me, he's also in band, and you guys have probably picked up that most of my friends are in a lot of activities that I do. But most recently, I had one of his birthday parties, and we went karting, and it brought up the idea of like motorsports because we are both a little bit into automobiles and that sort of stuff. So would you just like to introduce yourself, Luciano?
Hello, my name is Luciano Cartilli. I used to do club karting for around 6 years, since I was 5 up around until I was 12, but I'll be getting back into it this year, upsizing my kart into a Miata instead of karting, and that should be a fun experience.
Now, would you just like to explain how this recreational Miata League works?
So how it works is that there are two different leagues. The first one is NASA, which is the National Automotive Association, and then there is another one that works a little bit differently, but I'll be joining the NASA side of it. Then in the Spec Miata, there's two different types. There's a Spec Miata, and then there's something called SMX, which is newer, but it's more competitive and more expensive. I'll be getting into a Spec Miata just to start, but then after that, we'll see if I upsize, upgrade, or if I stay the same.
So Spec Miata is more easier to get into because obviously the SMX is like you're going to have to do a lot of modifications that are going to cost you a lot more than, for example, getting an older Miata and just revamping it. And, so I clearly saw that you were, like, first place in this karting thing, but, like, why do you have a connection to this idea of motorsports and racing?
I think it comes down to whenever I was growing up, because I actually grew up, I guess, around F1 and racing. I used to go to see a lot of races in person. Then also, I always liked, I guess, the Cars movie. I always liked Speed. My parents always used to tell me that I never really want to learn to walk, but always to run instead. And well, I do cross country and stuff like that, so it balances out. But I got my first go-kart whenever I was 5. I used to do a lot of practice with it just for fun. But then eventually it started to take up a lot of my time, which was why I had to take a 4-year break.
And on that side of F1, I've only been to one race, but it really is an experience. Like, you go there, you're with, I would probably say, like, 50,000 people in some, like, arenas. So, yeah, I've been to the Circuit of the Americas. It's a really fun track, but it's been getting more expensive, so I haven't gone. But, like, what races have you gone to, for example?
I think I went to Circuit of America. I believe I also went to one of the Monaco races once, which was fun. But I would say that the experience is very nice, especially during the beginning where we're able to walk the starting line and see all the pits, see all the cars. But also, one thing for anyone out there that does want to go, bring hearing protection because especially since I like music and stuff like that can get really loud really quick. But I would say that it's a very, very nice experience. It's a lot different than seeing it on TV, especially because you get to see how fast these cars truly are going 250 miles an hour plus easily.
And then, like, obviously with the hearing thing, like, if you're in the big public area, the grassy area, that is a fight for your life just to, like, get a spot to sit. Nonetheless, the cars are zooming very close to you. And, also, one thing that's annoying about Circuit of the Americas is that since it's so close to the airport, they can't have flyovers before the race starts. And then, so what would you say is your first or like favorite F1 team?
Well, for me, it's changed over the last couple of years. I used to start with Mercedes because, well, I like Lewis Hamilton. But sadly, these past couple of years, they've been doing not as good as I wanted. I mean, there's a classic choice of Red Bull, but in my opinion, I would rather want a team like Aston Martin or McLaren to start doing good because I personally really like their drivers. And for me, I would say that it's very interesting to see someone that is kind of not Max Verstappen actually have a chance at the podium.
I would agree because, I mean, even though Lewis Hamilton's like P2, P3 recently, he's never really gone in like a long streak of that first place finish. And I would say for me, I just find Red Bull to have a too dominant stance on the market. especially saying that with the fact that they have two teams in F1. They have the Red Bull, like the top one, and then there's the lower one, which I forget its name, but it's a similar one. I think it's called Taurus or something like that. But there's a lot of teams in F1 that don't really get a chance, and I think that there should be like some measuring of like how much you can spend on a car so that lower teams are able to compete better, since the other teams wouldn't be able to have such a high amount of spending to make that car super good.
I mean, I definitely agree with that, but also you have to keep in mind that that F1 specifically is not specifically just about the drivers, but it's about the development of technologies in the cars. So even though two teams may have around equal experienced drivers, it pretty much all comes down to how the car is built, because F1 is a show of performance of the cars themselves, which is why you see a lot of these F1 teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren are doing F1 so that they're able to put some of these technologies into their cars as well.
That's actually a cool perspective, because in MotoGP, I don't know if you know about it, they're limited to a certain engine size. You can't spend more than this. You have to contact, there's only one supplier for tires, and it's a very like strict rudimentary thing. But F1, it's like, do anything to make your car super good, other than burn literal fuel like out there. Right. Which is another form of racing.
Right. And I mean, there's still a lot of restrictions with F1, but I believe that it gives the car makers a lot of freedom, I guess, when it comes to these different technologies that they're able to employ. Like, for example, the car cannot be too low to the ground, which is why there's restriction on that. It cannot be too big, even though these cars have been growing in size the past couple of years. But a lot of it comes down to aerodynamics and engine technology, which is very interesting.
And also the technology, it needs to be helping for the driver, because you see these guys, they're pretty much stuck in there for 2 hours, correct?
Right.
And it has to be comfortable for them, probably unlike what it was in the 50s and 60s when F1 was just starting. They have to be able to withstand intense conditions for 2 hours in there, so definitely they need to have that budget to be able to make the car sturdy enough and safe enough for the driver.
I mean, I definitely agree with that, but on the contrary, though, I believe F1 is also a lot about weight saving, so there's a very fine balance with the engineering about keeping the driver safe and keeping the car good. But in contradiction to what you say, I don't think it's about comfort, it is about that efficiency. Because what is the comfort of a car like a Rolls Royce if it's not as fast? So, like, a quick example is that F1 cockpits actually get to like over 100 degrees easily, and with their tracksuit and everything, it can get really, really uncomfortable in there. And also, fun fact, Rafa, did you know that to engage the brake of a F1 car, a driver pretty much has to put as much pressure on the brake as if lifting a refrigerator with one leg, so around 300-ish pounds.
Oh, that's a lot of force. Now, I was going to say, with the efficiency, Le Mans, it's a French race where the car literally has to have, like, an insane amount of fuel efficiency to be able to finish the 500-mile race before everybody else. And in Le Mans, there are these cars that they're basically hybrids, so they can't really go as fast as normal F1. I would also like to correlate, like, the driving thing to NASCAR and see like how America views driving differently than Europe with F1, because NASCAR, it's a lot more teams, the races are smaller, but it's definitely a more community-based thing, because F1, it's definitely like, oh yeah, I can choose any one of these big teams, but they don't really have a home city. But when it comes to NASCAR, they each have like a little hub.
Right. And talking on the different aspects, of different races, I think, like, especially the style of racing across these, like, for Le Mans is endurance. So, actually, most of these cars are, I believe, detuned. You can fact check me if not. But they're specifically made to be a lot more endurance-based, meaning they don't break down as often. And even with comparison to F1 engines usually last around a single or maybe even a second race. So with Le Mans, with these long endurance at probably very high speeds, you have to be very careful with the car.
And that's not even to mention the tires, because in F1, tires get changed every race. Like, for a normal car, your tire is going to be made of a substance that is way different from these F1 tires because you're going for a longer distance. But these F1 tires, they're meant to get hotter and gain more traction so that the cars can go faster. And they just wear down very rapidly due to their construction. And one more thing about the F1 cars. So it might appear like it's just a flat thing, but it's actually very strangely shaped if you go and look at it, because there's the front end and then there's a tall bumper. It's very geometric, like you said, with the aerodynamic thing. And I would say there's a lot of mathematical concepts like involved in the engineering of that.
Right. And I think the main thing that comes down to it, especially since F1 is very corner-based racing, I would say it's downforce, because you really want downforce to have the grip to go around corners, especially at these high speeds that F1 cars are going. So I believe the average F1 car probably has around 2 tons of downforce. I might be wrong, but it allows these cars to take corners at the speeds that no other car, no matter what, won't be able to take. But also, along with downforce come the brakes. I actually did a little research on F1 brakes recently, and it's very interesting how not just how crazy efficient these brakes are, but how crazy powerful these brakes are.
Mm-hmm.
Because these brakes have 6-piston calipers, carbon ceramic, of course, but also the heat dispersion that these brakes have to make sure that they don't work during the race is actually kind of crazy.
And wait, so for a normal, well, not normal car, but for a sports car, let's say Mercedes AMG, whatever, a Mercedes AMG, like how many pistons is it going to have on the brakes?
Honestly, it will probably have around 3 or 4.
So yeah, it's not as much.
Yeah, and also in comparison, like the brakes themselves or at least the brake discs are a lot larger, so it has more surface area to clamp onto.
Mm-hmm.
And also with most normal cars, they usually have a alloy of metal as the brakes, which means that if you use your brakes too often, then they might have a chance of melting, so they're not
That's
physically there, which is why truck drivers, which I'm getting a little off topic, but what truck drivers do to not use their brakes is they just use their engine to brake and the different gearing. Because, well, if you have a truck that is that large, how would you be able to stop it if you lose your brakes?
So it's like the California rolling stop. You don't really stop, you just change your gear so that you're slower.
Exactly.
And then, like, obviously, we're getting close to the age where we get a car. What car would you want to get as, like, your dream car?
For me, my dream car, especially since I grew up around racing, would probably be a Porsche 911 GT3 RS.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that is a very track-focused car, not comfortable at all, but man, I've seen those and how they race. They're pretty fun to go around the track.
Now, in terms of, like, safety, is there an element of G-force that those cars give you, or is it only like the F1 actual racing cars?
I mean, they still give G-force, but, well, F1 being F1 is a difference of driving a car and I guess being strapped to a rocket.
Mm-hmm.
So G-forces for F1 cars, these F1 drivers had to stay really, really fit just to be able to not only handle them, but be able to think and race clearly through those G-forces. And even with go-karting that I used to do, I experienced a lot of those G-forces, but it also helps a lot to know when your car is about to lose grip. So even with normal cars, you're able to feel it to an extent. And it's all about testing the limits, but eventually you'll find that line.
So would it be correct to assume that, like, not as heavy as what astronauts feel as they're going to space, but F1 drivers are feeling a lot of force being, like, implemented on them?
Oh, no, I would say that it's definitely more.
It's more than an astronaut going to
more.
space. Okay, yeah. Because obviously the astronauts have the capsule, but F1 drivers have, like, 4 inches of protection, let's say.
Right, but not only that, in contrast to astronauts, there's a lot more rapid acceleration and deceleration when it comes to these F1 cars. So especially when taking a corner, I believe that these F1 drivers can take 5 Gs easily. But there's still, one other profession that you can do that has more Gs than both F1 drivers and astronauts combined, which of course would be fighter pilots.
And then I think the astronauts thing, how they don't feel as much speed, it's because of the relativity, right? I know we're getting into science here, but they're just in the capsule and they see like going out of Earth. But in F1, you can literally feel the ground like under you, barely under you, and you're going at these, 200 mile per hour speeds. It's much more intense.
It's not even that, but speed is actually very relative because you have to have a point, like a reference point to base off of. For rockets, I would say the acceleration is technically a lot less, even though you're able to go a lot faster. It may take like 5 minutes just to get up to speed. And also, like I said before, that acceleration and deceleration is just not the same as you would find in other aspects.
Now, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and thank you for everybody who's listening to us. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
See you.